Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we do at Gulf Restoration Network. I'm an analyst for them. And it really directly correlates with both stories that we saw today. So I have two buzzwords in the title, empowerment and resiliency, and I think that at Gulf Restoration Network, our approach is really trying to empower resilience, empower communities through science and policy. Just a little bit about who we are. Gulf Restoration Network is committed to uniting and empowering people to protect the natural resources of the Gulf Coast. So we are an environmental organization, but we mainly work around environments that communities are directly involved in. And usually we actually work with communities that reach out to us directly. Just a little bit of context about where we are. So this is a map made by NOAA, and it shows the Gulf-wide coastal flood exposure hazards. And you can see Louisiana really sticks out in this map. And even folks in Baton Rouge are exposed to the threats of coastal flooding and coastal storms. And as we know, rain events are going to continue to be longer, they're going to be more frequent, and we're going to get more water. So the second quote, extreme rain events may occur up to 2 to 3 times as often by the end of this century. And so with all of the things that we're facing, we need to keep in mind that not only is it happening now, but it's going to keep happening with more frequency in the future. And so to be resilient, we need to really face the facts and be prepared to do something about it as a community. So in Louisiana, we're actually facing a lot of the same man-made natural disasters that were referenced, not with dams necessarily, although there are many plans to dam various rivers, and we work with communities to oppose that. But really, living here in Louisiana, our levees and our infrastructure that's supposed to protect us from flooding has actually caused a lot of the flooding. And if you think about the way levees work, they protect certain communities and certain people, right? So there's actually people that are on the outside of those levees and communities that have even more frequency of flooding, higher water than before because of the levees we built. But more than just that, we are actually actively developing residential areas in floodplains. So we're talking about areas that have historically flooded, have always flooded, and we're still building new housing, new commercial developments in these areas. And most of the times, developers come in, build the houses, build the communities, leave, and they don't have to pay or be responsible for what happens afterwards. It's really the communities and honestly the taxpayers that end up shouldering the burden. And not only are these people going to be losing their houses and their livelihood, but they're directly in physical danger when these events happen. And so, yes, we have made things worse for ourselves, but there is something that we can do about it. So I'm going to talk to you guys about a little bit of science and policy. So within the Gulf Restoration Network, we mostly work under the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act, which is a federal act that covers the whole nation. And we I mostly work with Section 404. And Section 404 deals with wetlands, and it's under the Clean Water Act because wetlands clean water. And so this is where we get a lot of our legal standing for the work that we do. And under Section 404, one way that we help communities is by really monitoring the permit applications that come through the state of Louisiana as well as federally. And I know that sounds really dry, but this is basically the web page where you're going to see new developments that are going to be coming out that are going to be in the wetlands, anything from industrial pipelines, residential developments, commercial, anything that's going to impact wetlands, you're going to see a permit application on this list. And so we kind of serve as a first beacon of warning of, hey, this development is coming up. And we monitor hundreds of these a year. So personally, I run a database. And my boss, Scott Eustace, really developed that where we have logged these for the past 5 years so we can look at cumulative impacts over the total course of these permits. as well as keep looking for new ones, and we have a really keen eye on which ones communities are going to care about, which ones are going to impact communities. And when we do learn about those, we send out action alerts so the community can actually be involved in both the public commenting process and also through the permit applications, we comment and ask for public comment periods. And so in the first movie, when you saw in the first documentary, when you saw all of those people in the room and they were talking and they had the presentation, that's generally what we ask for the communities to have an opportunity to speak about what they want, how this is going to impact them, and be able to speak into the process. Honestly, in the state of Louisiana, as was mentioned, they're not very good about doing the right thing, but at least we can get on the record what we want, what the communities want, and we can make small little wins. The second way that we have jurisdiction in the state of Louisiana is from the Coastal Master Plan that was also referenced in the first documentary. And this is a map of Louisiana, so you can see where the political line of the coastal zone is, but if you think back to that coastal flood hazards map, it's way more extensive than that. But these special areas that are in the Coastal Master Plan are being evaluated, and there's actually a permit process for the coastal zone as well. So if you want to do any developing in the coastal zone, you also have to get a coastal use permit. And same thing, there's a public comment period, and there's also the opportunity for us to ask for public meetings so that the community can have an input on what is going to be coming into their community. Most recently, there's a new plastics plant that they're trying to put in St. James, right next to where we just had the win with Bayou Bridge because they don't have an evacuation route. And unfortunately, the plastics plant will also block their evacuation route. So just today, we submitted the comments for that, and we got over 100 signatures from our action alert, letting the community know and letting people know this is going to be up and coming and an issue that they should be aware about and prepared to respond to. We also have NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, and that is the federal act that gives us the ability to have input on federal projects. And so since Section 404 comes from a federal act, NEPA also applies to that. And it allows public input on decision making and requires certain policies if the project is large enough to actually study the impacts of the development. Also within the Louisiana Coastal Master Plan, there's a non-structural program. And what that means is these areas have been identified as areas where they're either going to have to raise the homes or completely leave the area. And here's a map of all of the areas that have been identified in the state of Louisiana as non-structural. And so these are areas where you would expect that development would no longer be continuing because we know that in the very near future, the flooding is going to be so severe that people are going to have a hard time living there. Surprisingly, there are still new developments going into these areas. And also, you'll notice in the blue teal color up there, that's Vatry, and that actually St. James community is included in that non-structural program. They say that it's going to be billions of dollars to fund, help fund people to raise their homes and also to evacuate and leave these areas, but currently that part of the program is completely unfunded. So where we see a potential for equitable help for communities that are being forced to change and move because of climate change, we see the forethought of, oh, we need to have this kind of program, but then we don't see the follow-through of actually funding it. And so we advocate for funding of this project. So I'm going to kind of walk you through how the permitting process brings us to a win for the community. So with the Bayou Bridge pipeline, have you all heard about the Bayou Bridge pipeline? I see lots of head nods. Okay, so we were some of the first people to actually see that this pipeline was going to happen because of our permit application scraping process. And Bayou Bridge pipeline has a lot of issues, but it has a lot of impacts to wetlands, and it has really disproportionate impacts to communities of color and other marginalized communities. And so it's really not only a racist act, but an act that's destroying the natural resources that we do have left in the state of Louisiana. And so we were able to catch that permit application, and this is what our action alerts look like. So we see this permit come across, and we try to communicate that story out to the public so that the public can start to take action on this. And so this was one of the first actions that we took, and it was actually very successful. It reached a large group of people. I'd also like to give credit to my boss, Scott Eustace, for doing a lot of community organizing around that. So then we take the permit application and we write a very technical comment letter. And this is where my job comes in as an analyst. I use maps and I use data and any studies that I can find to respond to the permit application to say, no, here's scientifically why you shouldn't destroy the wetlands, why you shouldn't put a pipeline across the Chaffalay Basin, why you shouldn't negatively affect the community of St. James that's been already affected by so many industrial impacts. And from this initial work with the permit application and submitting the comments, we're able to build support within the community, and we had a lot of amazing water protectors. We partnered with a lot of different groups that were opposing the pipeline for their own reasons, whether it be it's crossing their own land or they had come from the DAPL fight. And then we also were able to get a series of community meetings that you see in the photo on the lower right-hand corner to allow the community to respond and how they were going to be affected by this. And so ultimately our goal was to stop the pipeline, but obviously that is a huge monster that cannot be tackled in one foul swoop. But what we were able to do was listen to the communities, hear what they needed out of this, and one of the major things that we were able to identify obviously with the St. James community is that they didn't have an evacuation route. And so we started looking for ways to take legal action. And ultimately, these comment letters serve as the basis for legal action. So hopefully we can have a little bit of leverage and work with the industry to either stop the development or modify it. But when a little bit of pressure from the comment letter doesn't work, we do sue. And so in the process of litigation, we also do flyovers. So we did a flyover of the construction of the Bayou Bridge pipeline. We do flyovers in the ocean to look for oil spills. In this particular case, we were documenting the way that the sediment was going into the water, as well as the way that it was damming the flow of water from north to south as the pipeline right-of-way is moving east to west. And so with the comment letter, with the help of a legal team, the community, and these flyovers, we got a small win. So the state of Louisiana actually declared the Bayou Bridge pipeline permit for the coastal use permit illegal because they did not provide an evacuation route for the St. James community. And although that might seem a small win within the larger context of things, this is that level where we can actually have an impact and make things a little bit better for the community, make things a little bit more livable and have a better quality of life than not having any input from the public at all. Another example, when the floods of 2016 happened in Baton Rouge, it was a really big deal, and so we wanted to understand what was the cause of that flood and what can we do about it. And so we found out that there is a huge sand and gravel mining operation that goes on the rivers on the Amite and the Tangipahoa. And so we were able to map all of those mines, and combined we see over 26,000 acres of wetlands that have been eliminated due to these sand and gravel mines. And the community was completely unaware that these sand and gravel mines were having such a huge impact on the flood. It causes more flashy floods, because you're limiting that floodplain forest, so the flood is higher and it comes faster. And with each inch of water that a community sees, the recovery time is longer, the resiliency is weaker, and more money has to be poured into that area to recover. And so this is what a sand and gravel mine looks like. The sand and gravel mine is on the Amite. And you can see how it just completely destroys the landscape. And what actually happens is when high water comes, it captures all the sediment and brings it downstream, which causes a myriad of issues. Technical term, fluvial instability. And then this is actually a restored sand and gravel mine. So this is what we want to see happen with all of these abandoned mines, is actually restoring them to forested wetlands. And each acre of wetlands can hold up to 1 million gallons of water. So if we were to restore all 26,000 acres of sand and gravel mines, we would add over 26 billion gallons of water storage capacity to these watersheds, and that would effectively lower the height of the flood as well as the duration of the flood, and would significantly impact the communities that are currently affected by the severity of flooding and help to build resiliency. And so this is a picture of the Amite River where it hasn't been mined, and look how beautiful it is and how happy we are, and we want to see more of that. So thank you for bearing with me through this very technical speech about how we use permit applications to help work with communities to fight for the little wins that we can get. If you would like to learn more, please visit healthygulf.org. If you want to actually give comments on a development in your area, we would love to help you do that. And here are some other links if you would like. Here's the link to the Army Corps website where the wetlands permit applications are, and also the Office of Coastal Management where the coastal use permits are. And that's it. Y'all have any questions? Yeah. Yeah, so to restore particularly the wetlands that we were looking at with the sand and gravel mines, you take the grade of the land because you have the piles from the sand and you have the pits from them digging it out, and you restore the grade of the land to a natural slope with some contours in there, transverse to the flow of the river. And that is going to be a costly endeavor, but it actually has a lot of economic benefits. Not only does it restore the habitat that provides a lot of opportunities for recreation that has been lost on the Amite, but it actually protects your property. A lot of the property owners on the Amite have been like literally losing their property to the river. And so when you restore the wetlands, it protects not only your property, but all your neighbors as well. So we're trying to work with different funding sources from the Scenic Rivers program to the state to federal flood recovery money to actually see those dollars in collaboration with private landowners to restore these mines. It's not cheap though. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, there's no deadline. These areas are actually usually above 14-foot base elevation, so these areas are already at risk right now. So if this program were to be equitable and actually work, we should be doing buyouts now, and we should be providing the monies for people to elevate their homes now. The longer we wait, the more dire the situation's going to be. Yeah, these are suggestions. So the program is intended to provide funding for people to raise their homes or to leave and move somewhere else. But the new developments that are coming in here, unless like the parish or the city has requirements in terms of how they build their homes, there's absolutely no requirement for them to do it in any kind of way that's going to deal with the floodproofing. And in fact, we see a lot of residential developments in these areas that are slab on grade, meaning they literally put the house at the elevation of the ground, even though it could be in a flood zone where they normally have 5 to 10 feet of water during an event. And there's no responsibility on the developer to tell the people that they're selling the houses to do this either. So a lot of people, first-time homeowners, it's a cheap house, I'm gonna buy it, great for my family. 5 years later, a flood comes, start all over. We do fight those new developments, and especially when we have support from the community, we do win sometimes. We're doing that right now in Port Manchac. Up where you see those two lakes connected, up at the top, in between those two, in the middle of the wetlands where hardly anyone lives, the majority of the people that live there live in camps partially during the year, and they like their rural living. They're trying to build a huge 2,500 person Florida-style luxury residential development. And if any of you are familiar with Eden Isles, which is on this side of Lake Pontchartrain and is mostly empty, it was also a fancy new residential development that was going to bring in a lot of money, which didn't end up happening, and actually people there have flooded and left. And so we're trying to preserve the 100 acres of wetlands that would be lost as residential development, as well as support the community in wanting to maintain their way of life. That's a very rural, recreational lifestyle. Anyone else? Thank you so much for having me.